coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
And survey the scene. I mean, it's like the end of kind of a Lord of the Rings battle. Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studio at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. Well, it's been a very busy 48 hours with 1,641 council seats up for grabs across 23 local authorities. 4 regional mayors, 2 local mayors have been elected. Oh, and there's a small matter of a by-election in Runcorn and Helsby. That by-election was triggered, of course, when former Labour MP Mike Amesbury resigned after being convicted of punching one of his own constituents. The campaign trail felt like a 2-horse race from the off, with Reform candidate Sarah Pochin and Labour candidate Karen Shaw neck and neck throughout. Now, we were expecting the result to come in earlier this morning, Friday morning, but a recount was called when just 4 votes separated Labour and Reform. Then, at 6 a.m, this is what broke on GB News.
Sarah Joanne Pochin, Reform UK, 12,645.
That's right, Reform are back up to 5 MPs, with Sarah Pochin becoming the party's first female Member of Parliament, winning by just 6 votes. The closest by-election result in decades. Nigel Farage took the opportunity to take a swipe at Sir Keir Starmer.
He's a coward. He doesn't lead from the front. You know, I mean, he obviously feared they might lose, therefore he didn't come. I knocked on doors for 8 hours today, and I would have been here in this hall with our candidate, regardless whether we'd won or lost by 6 votes. And somehow with Keir Starmer, who, by the way, is a perfectly decent human being, but somehow with Keir Starmer, it's caution, 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 and no one really knows quite what he actually believes.
And that led, a few hours later, to me asking Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, whether in fact he was a coward, as Nigel Farage said. Here's what he replied.
The results are disappointing, and I could stand here and say to you, opposition parties always do well in by-elections like this. It was very close in Runcorn, etc., etc. But what I want to say is my response is, we get it. We were elected in last year to bring about change. That's what people desperately want. We started that work. The NHS waiting lists are down. Wages are up more than prices. Interest rates are down. But the message from these results, I think, is go further, go faster. That chimes with what I want to do. And that's what I take out of this. And I'm determined that we will go further and faster on the change that people want to see.
Meanwhile, over in Lincolnshire, the former Tory MP, Dame Andrea Jenkyns, became the first ever Reform UK mayor, declaring it a new dawn in British politics. Well, I've been around for enough new dawns to know they rarely happen, but there we are. She called it that. It may be the case. And then as we speak on Friday afternoon, local election results are coming in with Reform UK sweeping up Tory and Labour seats nationwide. Are you keeping up at the back? We certainly are doing our best. So to delve further into this and explain what it all means, I've called an emergency podcast. And who better to help analyse this than the twists and turns of an amazing 24 hours than one of the presenters at GB News who watch all unfold in real time, live throughout the night. I'm joined after just 4.5 hours sleep by my friend Tom Harwood, GB News Deputy Political Editor. Tom, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
It's unbelievable. What a night. What a night. I mean, we don't know where we're going to end up. The listeners will know by the weekend, but it feels right now that the old certainties of two-party politics have been swept away by Reform UK.
I mean, there is only one story today, and that is, of course, the beaming face of Nigel Farage.
Chilling face.
Well, the Labour Party put out a tweet on election day saying, wipe the smile off his face tomorrow morning. And of course, the Reform UK party, quote, tweeted that in the early hours of this morning with 2 words, wakey wakey, and a picture of Nigel Farage laughing. I mean, it is just astonishing looking at that by-election. The swing that had to be achieved to take that seat from the Labour Party was astonishing.
15,000 majority Labour, that was their safest seat?
It really depends on how you measure it. You can measure it by percentage vote, you can measure it by absolute votes, you can measure it by the majority.
So what was it then on those measures?
It could well be the between the 40th and the 60th safest seats, depending on which measure you want to choose. But well into the Labour majority territory. I mean, if you had that swing replicated across the country, Labour would be winning 430 seats.
Yes.
Sorry, the Reform Party would be winning 430
Reform,
seats.
that's right. A 200-seat majority, 427 seats, according to electoral calculus, with a 35% share of the vote. Just those numbers quickly that Martin Baxter has forecast for GB News. Reform on 35% of the election, Labour 27%, Tories 14%, Lib Dems 6%, Greens 8%. That, and then, of course, Reform on 427%, Labour 156%, Conservatives well down to 4%. Lib Dems 17, Green 2.
Now, it must be said, you can't extrapolate the peculiarities of a by-election where there's a big squeeze on the Lib Dem vote, there's a big squeeze on the Conservative vote. The Conservatives basically didn't campaign in this seat. Now, that's a bit unfair on the local candidates, but you didn't see Conservative shadow cabinet ministers.
They're the same as the Greens, weren't they? 2,300 or so for Greens and the Tories. That means barely campaigned.
Squeezed to nothing. And listening to Labour campaigners on the ground, listening to senior figures in the Labour Party talking behind the scenes, speaking to some of those people last night, they really were squeezing the Conservative vote. It's interesting. Look at the areas where the Labour Party focused on. Some of the more wealthy areas of the constituency, the outer areas of the constituency, the traditionally more Tory voting areas of the constituency, while Reform was pounding the council estates. The message from the Labour Party in much of that election campaign was talking to Tory voters who might be a little bit worried about a Reform government, talking to sort of say, keep out Reform to those soft Tory voters in a sort of peculiar cross-dressing sort of way. You had Nigel Farage talking to the Labour voters and Labour talking to the Tory voters.
All certainties are disappearing. And the theme of this podcast is we started the election period this week thinking, well, by the weekend there's a Reform Tory tie-up. Will Baird not be removed? And Jenrick comes in, Robert Jenrick, to do a deal with Farage. I'm not sure those certainties remain anymore. I think it's really probably because Reform is going after Labour votes and Tory votes. It's not really a right-wing story in the same way.
Well, exactly. And Nigel Farage is not wanting to do a deal with the Conservatives. I think from his perspective, that might drag down his popularity at this point in time. I mean, talking to Reform senior politicians at the start of the night, they were saying, well, we might win 1 or 2 councils. At this point, they've already won 7 and are likely going to pick up a few more. But my goodness me, it's just a picture across the board beyond what anyone was expecting Reform to achieve.
It's what we've known at GB News. We know our listeners, we have to know them very well. It's our job is to know what they like, what they want. They are angry people. They feel that it's not working for them. They're just a bit cross about nothing working. Not necessarily right-wing or left-wing. We're just cross people who feel they may have voted for Brexit. That was to give power back, force our leaders to do things they want, control immigration. That hasn't happened. That's what's so frustrating, I think, and that's what Farage has tapped right into.
Absolutely, and you've had 2 elections now, both in 2019 and in 2024, where there was a wave of optimism from some voters thinking now is the moment for change. Now is where politicians are going to listen to the people. This is the moment where these politicians are finally going to do what they say. And people have felt down not just in 2019, but also in 2024. There's a great sense of betrayal from politicians saying one thing before the election and seeming to do something completely different after they get into power.
And the more Keir Starmer talks about change, as he did when I saw him in Luton midway through Friday, to ask him those questions about whether he was a coward not campaigning in Runcorn, he says, we are doing change, we'll speed it up, but people don't feel any change. I was really struck by a line that Sarah Pochin said when you were presenting on GB News. She said, people living in Runcorn, there's a real cost of living crisis. There are no leisure centres here, no cinemas. To go to the leisure centre or the cinema, you have to pay a toll to cross the bridge to get them. Now, this government has spent money on the south, on Oxford-Cambridge train lines. They've put money into the airports. There's a feeling that this hasn't really changed. It's a Labour government spending money in the south, not where their voters live.
Yeah, and it's a difficult position because if you speak to economists, wanting to deliver the biggest bang for the buck for infrastructure, I mean, the big growth areas where the tech companies want to go, it's easy to see why the Treasury is saying, well, if you spend X million on this train line, you're going to get a lot more for it than if you spend X million on a train line. Although, that being said, there have been some train lines that were opened by the previous government, for example, in the northeast, reversing some of those beaching cuts from the 60s. And they expected a certain level of passenger use of these rail lines that's been exceeded by more than 50%. So interestingly, all of these
trains.
Well, exactly. The sort of the basis on which the Treasury has made decisions over reopening lines.
Wrong. Well, that's a whole different podcast.
That's a whole separate infrastructure podcast, which we can go into another time.
Just about, but fascinating too. But I just think it's there's a wake up call for these individuals. I look at the Tory big Bs who lose their seat based on the Runcorn result. Yvette Cooper, Bridget Phillipson, Rachel Reeves, Liz Kendall, John Healey, Pat McFadden. They would all go. Some of those, not all, don't want to come on GB News. They don't want to address the concerns, I think, which our viewers and listeners have, which is shared, it seems, by a lot of people who vote Reform UK. They may want to change their tune.
I think they should change their tune, frankly. I mean, what an opportunity to speak to the very voters who have lost trust in first the Conservative Party and now the Labour Party.
Not all, because a lot of those do appear on the channel, but there's a few others.
There's a couple of names I think that audience members might notice of having not gone on. But I mean, there are some names that obviously come on a great deal to put across their case. But here's the fundamental thing. These seats, these local election seats, were last up in 2021. As the Conservatives keep reminding us, this was the vaccine boost. This was the high point of Boris Mania, but also the low point of Keir Starmer's leadership. This was when Keir Starmer was considering resigning, when the Labour Party lost a parliamentary seat in Hartlepool that even Jeremy Corbyn won in the worst Labour result since 1935. Keir Starmer achieved a worse result than that worst night for the Labour Party. And yet, from that baseline, the Labour Party have lost more than 100 councillors. I mean, what an extraordinary position.
As things stand late on a Friday, and again, that will change overnight. Yes, that is extraordinary. Just finishing before we go into the other parties, but Reform UK, I've been following this party, well, let's say his party, Nigel Farage, for about 20 years. You're a bit less than me, but a long time. We've often been drinking the Kool-Aid with him when he thinks I'm going to break through in Newark in 2014 or Peterborough, and so it goes on. He never quite gets there because of data. He has no idea where MPs are. But you look at the established bodies, knock on doors, they know where Mrs. Miggins, she always votes Labour, let's go her out. But they always do a very strong air war, a social media war, but not the ground war.
And that's the interesting thing
here.
The only time UKIP ever won parliamentary seats is when they had an incumbency advantage. In Clacton and in Rochester and Strood, when first Douglas Carswell and then Mark Reckless resigned from the Conservatives, but brought over a load of their campaigners with them, knew where their voters were in a reasonable sense. I know there was a row in Clacton over who or not had the data, but that I'm sure it gets into illegal territory. But there are big questions there. It does seem that this is a different sort of party now, a more professional party.
They've been playing for a while for this. They've known the Mike Amesbury issue, punching a voter. They knew there's likely to be a by-election. Whether they were planning a long time in advance, I don't know, but they have suddenly broke through in a way we haven't seen before.
And this speaks to a greater professionalism within Reform UK, thinking less about what people are shouting on Twitter, where they might have gone in a slightly different direction, and instead picking a pillar of the community in their candidate. The choice of Sarah Pochin for the Reform Party candidate in Runcorn was an inspired choice. She'd been the mayor of the town beforehand. She had a long political history and respect and hinterland in business. She sounded
like a Tory, didn't she, when she spoke last night on your show?
She did a bit.
The people of Runcorn have spoken. Enough is enough, she said. And I think, in a sense, the people of England have spoken today, and they've said enough is enough.
And it is extraordinary, looking not just in this one by-election where the Labour Party can and do argue that there were particular local circumstances. It's not every day that a member of Parliament gets a police charge for punching a constituent. And of course, that's the unique sense of that by-election. But my goodness me, the swing there. And then you look elsewhere in the country. I mean, never in the Reform Party's wildest dreams would they have picked up, at the very least, 7 councils where the Reform Party holds now a majority on those councils, will be able to make decisions locally. Just the stunning success in County Durham, where they've gone from a standing start of 0 to pick up a majority of that council, and a big majority of that.
Let's list those just for now, and it will change as we go through the day. Nottinghamshire, Kent, Lancashire, Derbyshire, Durham, Staffordshire, Lincolnshire, extraordinary. And this is real power. This is reform tunneling down into the fabric of our democracy, creating a network of local supporters. You know how important it is for these councils, and they will use these. Of course, they stood in the most seats, didn't they, Reform UK? Well over 1,600 seats, more than the Tories, more than Labour. I know that they turned down about 500, 600 candidates who didn't make the grade because they were weeded out with the vetting process. Yeah. But be all eyes on these new councillors. The 2 main parties plus Lib Dems and others will look at them and look at the choices they're making, what they're doing in office, and can they undermine them at all?
But also, you and I know people in the Conservative Research Department. You and I know people who trawl these sorts of social media
Twitter
accounts, both on the
Twitter
archaeology, both on the Labour side and on the Conservative side. There is not a shadow of a doubt that both the Labour and Conservative parties would have been crawling through the history of those 1,000 Reform candidates in this election. And isn't it astonishing, actually, that over the course of the short campaign, we haven't seen a single story on the front page of the Daily Mail or the inside page of the Sunday Times. We haven't seen anything on fruity comments from these candidates. And that speaks to a greater professionalisation in the vetting that Reform are doing.
He was mad in the old days. He was sick of being on the hook for stupid remarks made by people who you barely knew, who were on the UKIP badge. He couldn't stand it.
And I mean, we remember back to 2013 when the UKIP party got its big breakthrough in local government and suddenly had hundreds of councillors who Nigel Farage had no idea who these people were.
He's been blamed for that.
And you had one councillor who happened to be a former Conservative blame the recent flooding on gay marriage. I mean, you had all of these peculiar things that became cut-through issues where people who aren't that interested in politics could name something peculiar that a UKIP council candidate had said. And that became a very, very difficult thing for UKIP to contend with. Reform, a completely different beast.
Let's look at the mayoralties. Of course, we know that Dame Andrea Jenkyns won in Greater Lincolnshire, but look at how tight the other ones were. North Tyneside, Labour hung on over the Reform by 444. Doncaster, 698. West of England, 4 times bigger turnout than those two, nearly 6,000 majority. And the Aaron Banks, the guy who ran for Reform, kept slagging off the actual office he was running for. I mean, he barely wanted to win. He was doing it to make a statement. I mean, these aren't really well known to viewers and listeners, these mayoralty jobs, but they are important, aren't they?
They are, and what is astonishing about some of these is that there was polling done, and if anything, Reform was severely underestimated.
Yeah.
Look at the YouGov poll that said that the Greens would win in the West of England. They came third. Yeah. Behind Reform UK.
I thought Greens would do very well in the West of England.
Yeah, and of course they've picked up seats there. They won Bristol Central at the general election. They dislodged a Labour MP there. But also North Tyneside. I mean, this is not somewhere where Nigel Farage went knocking on doors. This is not somewhere where Reform had thrown the kitchen sink at trying to win this mayoralty. And a few hundred votes short, they came darn close to winning it by accident.
Yes.
I mean, this is what we're seeing time and time again. Close seconds for Reform where they don't win in these mayoral races. I mean, that is an astonishing thing that we're seeing across this country.
In real time, as we're talking, Tom, at 4:30, John Curtis, Professor John Curtis, of course, known by everyone as the guy who forecasts elections, he says Reform are on course to win 30% of the national vote, Labour 20%, Lib Dems 17, Tories 15%, Greens 11, others 7. We know that if they cut through, and Zia Yusuf said it on your programme Gosh, when was that earlier?
I think it was about just after 11 o'clock at night.
If they get to 35%, that is the moment when the system switches from being working against small parties to massively overinflating majorities for these parties. We saw it with Labour on that very thin majority, the very thin landslide they won in July. It could happen to Reform.
Yeah, just over 34% of the vote Labour got in 2024, and they won a 200-seat majority. I mean, it is astonishing, but particularly, the maths might even get it even more favourable towards Reform UK, given that we have competitively now in many of these places, not just Reform, Conservatives and Labour, but also the Greens and also the Lib Dems. I mean, the West of England mayor, the Labour candidate won on 25% of the vote. I mean, not 35%, no. 25% delivered her that mayoralty because there was a 5-party split. So the more parties become more competitive and that winning threshold just lowers and lowers and lowers. I wouldn't be surprised if on these numbers, on those numbers that you just read out, that projected national share where Reform has a 10-point lead over Labour's 20%, their 30%, that sounds to me like majority government territory on 30% of the vote.
And twice the Conservatives. So, as things stand, 14 of 23 councillors declared, 540 councillors for Reform. Let's not forget that there were 9 councils who are meant to have local elections now, and they aren't having them. And these are in places where Nigel Farage told us they were sort of nailed on to win. I mean, we haven't even gone there, and it looks like the forecast from John and Curtis, the Reform could win half the council seats up for grabs.
I mean, there is a sort of cephalogical idea that sort of the eastern coast of the country is the most Reform-friendly part of the country. And you look at that map of the parts of the councils that were meant to have elections and were cancelled, and you look at the ones that stood. And I mean, whether it's Suffolk, whether it's Essex, I mean, all of these places, I think Sussex was one of them. I mean, these places should be on the demographic side of things, some of the most Reform friendly. I mean, I hasten to suggest that had there been elections in some of these other councils, you would have got Reform majority after Reform majority after Reform majority.
And also, by the way, going back to the central point of this podcast, it's the end of two-party politics. Curtis now says it's likely that for the first time ever, that combined share of those two parties is less than 50%.
And that is such a move from the 2024 election when it was 59%, which in and of itself was remarked upon as an incredibly low combined share for the two largest parties. Normally floats between 70 and 80% in general elections. What we have seen in the most extraordinary way is that completely blown open in a way that we haven't seen since, the blip we saw in 2019 with the European elections that were never meant to happen, and suddenly you had the Tory party drop down.
That's right.
But then Boris Johnson got in and saved the fortunes of the Tory party. I don't see
Farage scores that too, by the way. Let's not forget.
Yeah. I don't see a Boris Johnson figure.
No.
Circling around the Tory shires, ready to save them. I mean,
let's survey the scene. I mean, it's like the end of kind of a Lord of the Rings battle. I mean, there's basically orcs everywhere, and people are being just trying to crawl to some form of safety, while Farage just smites away any oncomers. I mean, let's look at these parties. Let's start with Reform UK. What challenges has Nigel Farage got now looking forward? I mean, let's assume he wins, let's say 600 seats, not even 800. I mean, and with a couple of mayoralties and an MP.
Well, the problem when you are the front runner,
which he is now,
as in some senses Nigel Farage now is, the problem when you have the big mo in politics, momentum, everyone's quiver is drawn and pointing in your direction at your back suddenly. And we've started to see it in Prime Minister's questions already, where every question is turned as an attack on Reform
and he can't
UK.
Respond.
And he can't respond because he's sitting at the back there, despite being often second in the polls. He only has 5 members of Parliament. But then that becomes difficult because for the parties attacking Nigel Farage, how do they then seem like they're not the establishment ganging up on the insurgent? You can see how Nigel Farage could turn that round in his favour. And yet, I think the biggest pitfall will be what Reform actually do in positions of authority. They really have a big expectation now to live up to. If they win, if they form administrations in many of these different councils, and council tax doesn't go down, and services don't get better, and the bins still aren't connected.
Spending isn't cut. We know there's plans for Doge, bringing Doge auditors, Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk style auditors to take away DEI spending and ergonomic chairs he's mentioned before.
Yeah, and ergonomic chairs seems like an exuberance, but it's not a large percentage of any council's budget. I mean, the big contentious things are social care, or SEND kids, or
also funding is mandated by law.
Yeah,
you have like the 20% of the edge you can play around with. That's a priorities issue, but the rest you're stuck with.
And it's such a difficult position for these councils. So would there be some disillusionment, or will, from the pulpit of these councils, Reform be able to battle government, blame central government for problems that they preside over?
So that's the councils and Reform. Also, maybe they might get organised. Rupert Lowe, for all of his critics and the rest of it, let's not go into that. Mm-hmm. But when he said, I want to have some organised at the top of organisation at the top of Reform, he's right, isn't it? There should be a shadow Home Secretary. There should be a shadow Chancellor. There should be, or you don't agree? I
think it's hard. I think it's hard to do that when you have 5 MPs.
Yeah,
really hard to do that.
But that's what Lowe wanted. Will they get organised, or will they just simply keep shooting from the lip for 3 more years and win the election?
I mean, let's not forget that the idea of shadow cabinet roles was completely invented by the Labour Party in the 1920s. Okay. Before that, there wasn't. I mean, Gladstone never had a shadow chancellor. Disraeli never had a shadow team. I mean, what you had was a leader of the opposition, and a bunch of senior opposition MPs who would speak at the dispatch box at any one time. The formalised structure of a shadow cabinet was invented in the 1920s. The Tories didn't have it until they were then in opposition in the 30s, and the Liberal Democrats invented it in what was it, 2005, that they started having shadow positions.
Okay, so perhaps but I still think having organisation at the top may deal with the egos that fly around parties. But
no, that is true, and it is clear that they do need a lead spokesman on some of these issues. Even UKIP had an education spokesman, had a culture spokesman, and all the rest of it.
So the other parties too. Now let's look at Keir Starmer. He says he wants to go quicker, faster with the change programme. When I asked him a question this morning, he looked at me a bit he looked a bit startled by the question, because it was quite an aggressive question, but I felt it had to be asked of him. And he talked about, people are getting richer because of the inflation, wages are going up, and talked about the money being spent on the NHS, and so it goes on. Will you get any credit for that from the voters, do you think, or is that not enough?
Did Joe Biden get any credit for the fastest growth in the G7? I mean, these things take time. People have long memories. If the price level is higher, even if we have a few months where wage growth is outgrowing price growth, people can still see that loaf of bread is more expensive than it was last year. Yeah. And that price isn't coming down. Inflation has gone down, but the prices aren't coming down. The rate of increase is coming down. So people still feel poorer, even if those wage rises are... And it takes time to bed in. I mean, maybe in 4 years' time, people will feel a bit more comfortable.
And he has 4 years.
He does.
Let's not forget that. It does sound dramatic today, and it is dramatic. But we are 10 months into a 5-year Parliament, aren't we?
And given the polling, I think he's going to go long.
Well, we thought not, actually. Until today, I thought 2028 the election. I think that's pushing back into 2029.
I think when you have an unpopular government, whether it's John Major dragging his feet until the last moment in 97, Gordon Brown dragging his feet until the last moment in 2010, Rishi Sunak dragging his feet until almost the last moment.
Not on the fag end. They haven't been in power for years and years and years.
Feels like they have.
Does it rather? Kemi Badenoch, I said on air to you, I think, a couple of times, she says that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and I think that she's a marathon runner in a sprint. Being the point there being, she's just like, give me time, she's saying to voters, but there's no time because Reform are eating your lunch, Kemi Badenoch.
Absolutely, and in a world where it's two-party politics and you're comfortable thinking, you know what, we can take our time to go off there, sit in the corner, not worry about being popular because we'll develop a thorough policy agenda. That's not what people want right now. They want to see what you will do now. There are executive positions that matter now, and most importantly, my goodness me, Scotland and Wales in 12 months from now, will we be sitting here in this podcast studio saying Reform has taken over the government of Wales?
I think
will
that's a real possibility, Tom. A real possibility.
and then where are the Conservatives? Where's the Labour Party? I mean, this is the thing. These significant elections of devolved government aren't 4 years away. They're just around the corner.
He's a staging post for Farage on the way to, as he would say, to number 10. But back to the Tory party, I note also that Robert Jenrick, mooted to be the person who wants to replace Kevin Badenoch. He is saying today he backs Kevin Badenoch. He doesn't want to do a deal with Farage, wants to kill Farage off. So it goes on. Is he just defending his party against Farage now rather than worrying about his own position in the party?
Well, I think if Robert Jenrick, if we can imagine a world where Robert Jenrick might still want to be leader of the Conservative Party, difficult though that imagination might be. What else would he say other than, I have 100% support in my party leader? He's got to look more loyal than loyal, even if he isn't.
But has that chat gone away? I mean, we had thought, hadn't we, Tories reform, they're going to come together this year, next year, at some point. Farage doesn't need that, really. He's taking support from Labour supporters who wouldn't go near him. He would actually lose support were he to do a deal with the Tories now.
Well, that's the thing. It might be in the Conservative Party's interest to do a deal, but it doesn't seem at the moment like it's in the interests of the Reform Party, which is happily winning without any sort of non-aggression pact or joint ticket deal.
Those cheeky lines from Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader, vote Tory, get Labour, I think it was. I mean, it's just head scrambling.
Right, because you can look at results like the West of England, you can look at results like the North of Tyne, like Darlington, where if the Tory vote had gone Reform, those would all be Reform rather than Labour seats.
Quickly on Liberal Democrats, I haven't seen much of them. They are making some ground, I think, in the middle, towards the West Country.
Well, they call Middle England. I think they're expecting to win a couple of councils, but interestingly, in the southwest of England, they're picking up lots of seats from the Tories, but so are Reform, and it's being referred to as a sort of pincer movement, where what was once Devon a true blue county is now half turquoise, half orange.
Could be led by the fishermen there. I mean, Brexit was quite strong in those areas.
It was, and that was always interesting. That was why it was particularly difficult for the Liberal Democrats after Brexit in an area that was traditionally good for them. But of course, the Liberal Democrats in the 2010 election were promising an EU referendum, and that no doubt helped them in the Tiverton and Honiton's and the Tauntons and all the Cornwall areas and everything else like that.
And the rest, there's obviously, the Greens. I thought they might do better than they are doing. There's also independents. I think in some parts of the country, the issue of Gaza, Israel's playing strongly.
There was a candidate who won in one area who caused a bit of controversy, a Gaza independent candidate who caused a bit of controversy during the campaign for saying he wanted segregation between men and women. He won his seat.
Yes, saw that. And then this is a challenge to the left of the Labour Party. Tom Harwood, it's been extraordinary. It's been not the win. I didn't expect this to be so big for Reform UK. I spoke to Farage on Wednesday. I said, just come on, Nigel, you and me talking. Let's just do this deal, get on with it with Reform. He said, no, I want to destroy the Tory party. It's felt ridiculous then. It doesn't on Friday.
No. And I think you and I can sit here thinking, wow, they've overperformed by hundreds of seats. I think the astonishing thing is that people at the top of Reform did not expect this result either. They have overperformed in area after area. I mean, they are fairly giddy at this point on Friday.
Tom Harwood, thank you for coming here with little sleep, like me, but you did so well. Love your energy. I love your analysis. It's terrific. And do tune in to Tom whenever you can watch him weekdays. What are your hours?
12 to 3.
12 to 3 with Emily Carver, a great friend too. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Tom, what's your Twitter handle?
Tom HFH.
There we go. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk, for any thoughts about how you think this podcast is and Reform and so it goes on. If you enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, do leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help other people find it. Thank the great team of GB News worker bees behind the podcast, Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, back at Base Camp in Paddington, Ricky Nunes and George McMillan in our HQ or offices here in Westminster. And most importantly of all, thank you for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Tom does, and everyone else does, I suppose, and I want more Tom in my life, please do catch us all during the week on GB News with our latest political reporting for you and an analysis. And keep up to date with my and Tom's best reporting on our website, gbnews.com. But until next time, cheerio. Time for bed.